Canada is now expecting to take a tariff hit from the U.S. Tens of thousands of Canadians who work in the steel and aluminum industries will be the first to feel the impact from U.S. President Donald Trump's surprise move.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum, too.
Trump is expected to sign an executive order sometime today after 1 p.m. Eastern, which would impose a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports into the U.S. That will be a hammer blow to a number of steel and aluminum producing countries, not just Canada, and it's a move that comes somewhat out of the blue. So for more on this, we've reached Erin O'Toole, a former leader of the Federal Conservative Party. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first I wanted your thoughts on the impact of a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum exports. What will the impact be on Canada?
It'll be a very devastating impact, and we have to not only fight against it, but try and have it reversed for the long term. In the setup you talked about, this is kind of coming out of the blue. It's actually not coming out of the blue. This is exactly what we dealt with in 2018. I was there as the conservative critic for Ms. Freeland when she was negotiating NAFTA and the 232 tariffs. And we have to take some of these demands from the United States more seriously. On a good front, in August, before Donald Trump was elected, we did come into alignment with the U.S. policy on steel and aluminum from China. That was a good first step, but we're playing a bit of catch-up here, and I think we have to fight hard to get some exemptions, and particularly focus on sectors like auto and defense, where Canada's supply chain is critical for the U.S., and soon the president will see that, and these will hurt the American economy as well as the Canadian.
So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of the impact to the American economy. How much will they feel tariffs if they are in fact imposed? Because let's be clear here, we haven't had an official announcement, but if they are in fact imposed on Canadian goods here.
Well, they will feel it. You know, the U.S. auto industry has been having some challenges of late. The global auto industry has been having challenges as China disrupts auto manufacturing, including traditional and EVs. And the U.S. auto industry has been integrated with the Canadian supply chain and the Canadian auto industry since the mid-1960s. And as much as President Trump may want to change that, he can't untangle that combined supply chain overnight. And so it is going to cause supply chain disruption. And so I've often said with President Trump, the best thing to do is to make the Canadian case strategically to have certain parts of the steel and aluminum sort of sectors exempted for national security reasons. Auto and auto competitiveness, defense and defense industries are worth saying to the president, look, we're going to address some of your concerns, but for domestic security, let's drop them for auto or for defense. I think that's the way to start carving up his general approach on tariffs, because it will hurt their economy, but not as much as it will hurt the Canadian economy. Of course, we're far more dependent on the U.S. for our economic activity, so we have to take this seriously and fight back, both in terms of some of the misinformation we see on these tariffs in general.
Let's talk a little bit about diversification, because you talk about the dependence of the Canadian economy. There's been a lot of discussion about how to diversify, look at other international trade partners. Where should Canada be looking? What sort of thoughts do you have on that?
The two areas right away are the European Union, which is also worried about trade with the United States. You know, the EU seems to be a lower target than Canada and Mexico, unfortunately, but they're worried about disruption from the Trump administration. And Asia Pacific, or the Indo-Pacific as well, are huge opportunities for us. And for far too long, Canada focused just on China in terms of trade in Asia. But I was involved in the free trade agreement with South Korea. We have huge and growing markets in Indonesia and Vietnam, where Canada has some strong trade presence. So we need to diversify. We did that years ago when I was in the Harper government, because the U.S. economy was so slow at the time, coming out of the great global recession. Now we have to do it because the U.S. economy is treating us unfairly. So we should push back on these tariffs, many of them being introduced because President Trump and his administration isn't looking at the big picture. You know, the aluminum for Quebec saved the Western world. The P-51 Mustangs of the U.S. Air Force that helped save the world from Nazi tyranny, that was all Quebec aluminum. You know, we've had an integrated defense and auto industry using steel and aluminum. I think when he uses security as a reason for imposing tariffs, we have to do a lot to tell our Canadian story a lot better, fight back, but also be strategic to realize the U.S. is not going to change this sort of rebalancing of trade. So we have to also rebalance with them.
And perhaps that is one point of contention because it has proved to be difficult to negotiate with the current U.S. president because there does appear to be moving goalposts. And when we say coming out of the blue, certainly we're talking about the fact that there was an exemption or a 30-day pause. And now there are tariffs that could be announced again on a specific sector. I finally wanted to ask you about the threats to Canada's sovereignty. And we have heard that the thoughts from the U.S. president on perhaps making Canada a 51st state are some thoughts or suggestions that we should be taking very seriously, that it is a threat from the U.S. president.
Canada is the true north, strong and free, and absolutely nothing will change that. What we have to realize is Canada, and the Prime Minister in particular, doesn't need to respond to these sort of taunts. I've said to American members of Congress and the Senate that my grandfather deployed to Alaska to defend the United States before the U.S. Entered the war and as it entered the war. So we have we have to tell our story better in the United States. And we also have to make sure the Trudeau government last time did not take any of this seriously. And that's why I think President Trump is being particularly unfair. And we don't have to respond to the taunts. We have to be smart and stand proud for who we are. Canada is the leading country in the world, in my view, and that's why we should diversify our markets. We should be a supplier of energy, of resources, of ideas to the world. Don't respond. Don't take the bait. Let's just plot a course, try and get tariffs removed, and stand strong.
We will continue to watch for details on this story, that is for certain. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you.
Erin O'Toole is a former leader of the Conservative Party. You're watching CBC News.